let me remind everyone of what we just did together in 2020.
We're hopeful people get vaccinated and, maybe things loosen up over time.
Indoor dining is back, and so are the diners.
That also means bringing lots of staff back.
Will open its doors for fans with some requirements.
It's been 1 year since New York Governor Cuomo placed the state on pause, forcing businesses to shut down and many of us to pivot to working from home. As we see signs of reopening, how has the pandemic shaped our future? In this episode, we tackle the questions facing our jobs, with topics ranging from trends in structural redesign to how we manage our work relationships. But first, let's examine what initial steps businesses should take when considering jumping back in office.
The first step is to reconstruct how work is done. New ways of working and new ways of thinking about culture can be developed, which are actually stronger than what we had before. The second is, based on that, decide what you do with talent. That for individual roles, they only need to come in once a month or once a quarter. You might be able to source that talent from across the country rather than just being in the specific city. So the talent in your workforce could look very different. The third step is then about the workplace. You then have to design the office to fit exactly that purpose. And then the fourth is then, now that you know what the office should look like, how many offices do you need? Where should they be? How should you think about flexibility of leasing, given some of the uncertainty that's going to be emerging?
Given that uncertainty, New York City has undoubtedly seen a shift in workspace. According to Property Shark, just under 7,500 spaces are currently up for rent in the Big Apple alone. So what structural differences can we expect to see in a future office? I caught up with a few architects who share some of the hottest trends in redesign.
In the immediate, there's a lot of cleaning, physical separation, de-densification, ventilation where possible. For the pandemic, there was a large movement to see if we could have a container-free office, to offer soda and coffee for the dishware and glassware so that you would never have to have waste or paper that you could actually have everything provided to you. Had to rethink that. That doesn't necessarily go with the comfort of knowing something's been sanitized or is fresh. So we're really looking at, recyclable paper goods or things like that. That was an interesting shift.
There's a couple of large office workplace projects that we're working on that very much play into a post-COVID world. And the trends were really trending that way anyway. Multiple entrances, touchless hardware, touchless entries, increase the ventilation of that, change the controls so that those can be touchless. An emphasis on bike entrances and bike storage. The demand for that is increased and going to increase as we move forward.
Hot desking and this idea of hoteling, it's kind of dependent on client typology or like who is using the office space. So the humans like to have ownership over their space. And I don't want to say we're territorial because that sounds really negative, but there's a psychological attachment to consistency of personal space. And so should we switch to a hot desking or a hoteling model? Will people actually feel safe with that, knowing that somebody else was sitting at that desk the day before? But there are kind of ongoing studies about if that is a viable solution or if that will start to make people feel more detached from the physical office space and prefer to work from home or in a remote environment.
People are not going to want to shift spaces quite that easily unless there are tools to keep them clean. The idea now that you walk into a conference room and there are wipes on the tables, I think our whole sense of cleanliness in the workplace will change. And, it'll go back. We'll forget about it for a while. But just like we're accustomed now to turnstiles and security entering buildings all these years after 9/11, I think 20 years after COVID, there will be a lot that remains in terms of a touch-free environment, our expectations of cleanliness. So all of these things are going to impact how we think about design and how we respond to the demands and expectations in ways that we haven't had to do in the past and or maybe haven't been as respectful of in the past.
Now that we know some of the physical changes we may see, what about our work relationships, especially with our boss and coworkers? While working from home, some of those boundaries between personal and professional life may have slipped away. But is it for the better? One architect planner who specializes in environmental psychology described to me what she's been seeing in the people-place connection.
People-place connections has physical, social, and digital dimensions. The office was the place to instill work culture among employees, where face-to-face interactions with your colleagues was how you learned your work and how you collaborated with people. It's hard to maintain those boundaries because we're working for longer. Workers themselves need to be really proactive about how they manage their work. Organizations and employers have been quick to invest in technology, but there are broader questions around who pays for broadband internet. How is housing rent going to be met? Those questions are kind of in the fuzzy gray area.
As we visualize what's next in our redesign, one trend is growing increasingly more apparent: the need for outdoor space. And with knowing some of the risks of climate change, some architects think it's the perfect time to press the reset button and create more environmental awareness in design.
Access to outdoor space, that's something that in our practice we have emphasized for many, many years. And we're just seeing an increased demand of that, increased awareness of some of the benefits of that.
Biophilic design and biophilic design strategies, which is taking cues from nature and incorporating natural design elements within the natural world into the built environment. And so now that we've been working from home in offices that are not meant to be offices for a little while, the importance of nature, I think, is much more, people are more aware of it, I would say now.
Anecdotally, everyone feels better when they feel connected to nature. But there's also scientific studies that there's reduced cortisol levels, reduced stress in your brain. There's increased cognitive benefits from this connection to outside.
So what do you think? Are you ready to get back in office, or do you hope to keep working from home? Whichever way you choose, one thing is for certain: the pandemic has forced businesses to evolve and continue finding ways to succeed. For NBC New York, I'm Linda Gaudino.